The wind howled across the dry plains like a wounded coyote, sweeping dust and despair over the cracked boards of the trading post that had become an auction block for lost souls. Men gathered there, minas, drifters, cowhands, faces baked hard by sun and whiskey, their pockets heavy with coins and their hearts light with mercy. Among the frightened crowd of captives stood a young native girl, her wrists bound with rough hemp, her dark hair matted from travel but her chin lifted high, eyes fierce as stone-lit amber. The auctioneer barked out her description in a voice that cracked like a whip: strong, young, can work fields or clean, ULL started $1. The girl did not tremble, though every eye upon her burnt like fire. She thought of her mother's last words before soldiers tore their camp apart: don't let them break your spirit, little star, even when they chain your hands. She repeated it like a prayer as the men began bidding, laughter cutting the air like spurs against stone. 150. 175, the numbers rose, until a man in a faded brown had stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding: $2. The crowd chuckled, no one bid higher. $2. The girl's fate was sealed for less than the price of a whiskey bottle. The auctioneer slammed his palm down. Zolt. To the cowboy. And that's when she spoke, her voice steady and low but sharp enough to silence the laughter. "You'll regret this," she said. "I won't obey." The words hung there like smoke in cold air. The cowboy, Jack Calhoun, met her gaze for the first time, and something flickered in his chest. He didn't know what it was yet: shame, maybe. Or memory. But he said nothing, just turned away and motioned for her to follow. She did not move. "Get up," he muttered. "I said I won't obey," she repeated, eyes blazing with defiance. The crowd cheered, some amused, others uneasy. Jack sighed and tossed a few extra coins to the guard. "Unti hier, he said. If she runs, she runs." The ropes fell away, and the girl stood free under the dying sun. For a heartbeat, Jack thought she'd bolt into the horizon, but she didn't. She stood there, tall and proud, then walked toward him, silent as dusk itself. They rode in silence for hours across the wild plains, where the land rolled in golden waves under the fading light. Jack's horse snorted softly, hooves striking the earth like a clock ticking down fate. The girl rode behind him on a second mare, her back straight, her hands unbound, her spirit untamed. He'd bought her to help on his ranch, to clean, cook, maybe tend to the animals, but now he wondered if he'd bought something else entirely, a mirror to his own soul, long buried under years of loneliness and regret. He'd fought in the war, seen men burn towns for less than revenge. He'd lost his wife to fever, his land nearly to drought. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped believing in goodness. He looked back once, saw the girl staring at the sky as if speaking to spirits he couldn't see, and he looked away quickly, ashamed of something he couldn't name. When they reached his ranch, a lonely patch of earth tucked between red cliffs and the whispering pines, night had already claimed the valley. Jack handed her a blanket, some food, pointed to the cabin. "You can sleep inside. Tomorrow you work." She did take the food. "You think you own me?" she asked. He hesitated. "I paid for your freedom from worse men," he muttered. "What you do with it now's your choice." Then he walked inside, leaving her under the stars. That night, he couldn't sleep. Through the window, he saw her sitting by the fire pit, whispering something into the flames. He didn't understand her words, but the rhythm of her voice carried sorrow and strength that reached through the cracks in his heart. The next morning, he found her tending to the horses, gentle but firm, whispering to them in her native tongue. The wildest mare in the stable, a gray with ice like frost, stood calm beneath her touch. Jack froze. He'd nearly been thrown by that horse more times than he could count. "How'd you do that?" he asked quietly. She didn't look up. "I listen," she said simply. "Horses don't obey, they understand." It was the first hint of peace that had touched the ranch in years. As days turned into weeks, she began to change everything without trying. The house smelt of herbs and roasted corn. The broken fences were fixed. The creek behind the barn flowed clearer where she'd placed stones for the spirits, she said. And every night, as the wind howled through the valley, Jack found himself sitting outside, just to listen to her sing. It wasn't obedience, it was grace. She carried dignity like armor, kindness like a weapon. But the town didn't forget. Whispers started. he bought her. Savage girl. He's lost his mindestens. Men who bid against him at the auction began showing up at his fence line, mocking, spitting, demanding he send her back. One afternoon, they came drunk and mean, tossing rocks at the barn. Jack came out, hand on his holster, but before he could speak, the girl stepped in front of him. Don't, she said softly. They are already broken. Her calm stopped him colder than a bullet. She turned to the men and said, You laugh because you fear what you do not understand. I forgive you. Her voice carried like prayer over the fields, and even the wind went still. The men cursed, spat again, and left, but not before one snarled, You'll pay for that, savage witch. That night, Jack couldn't hold his silence. Why didst you let me fight them? He asked. She looked at him across the fire. Because you already fight too much in sight. The words cut through him like truth itself. You think I'm cruel? He asked. I think you're lost, she said, not unkindly. He looked into her eyes then and saw not defiance but forgiveness. The kind he'd never given himself. He realized he hadn't bought her that day. He'd been bought by grace, by the chance to start over. Days later, tragedy came like lightning. One of the men from town returned with a torch, drunk with vengeance. He set fire to the barn before Jack could reach him. Flames swallowed the roof, horses screaming in terror. Jack ran in, cooing, trying to cut their ropes, but smoke blinded him. Then he felt her beside him, little star, her small hands pulling at the knots, her voice steady amid chaos. Go, he shouted. No, she coughed. We both go. Together, they freed the animals, stumbling out just as the roof collapsed behind them. When it was over, Jack fell to his knees, staring at the ashes, his face streaked with soot and tears. She stood beside him, trembling but alive. You should have run, he whispered. She shook her head. You paid for me with silver, she said softly. But tonight, I paid for you with fire. He broke then, the walls around his heart collapsing with the barn. He reached for her hand, not as a master, not as a savior, but as a man reborn. After that night, something changed. The town still whispered, but fewer came near. Tide heard how the Indian girl saved the cowboy's life, how she faced fire and hatred with grace. Seasons turned. The ranch bloomed again, wildflowers grew where ashes had been. Jack never spoke of the auction again, but every time he looked at her, he remembered her first words, You'll regret this, I won't obey. And he did regret it, not the buying, but the blindness that led to it. He spent his days learning her ways, the herbs she planted, the prayers she whispered to the wind. He built her a small house beside his own, though she often laughed and said, The sky is my roof. One spring morning, when the valley was green and alive again, Jack saddled his horse and rode with her to the old trading post, now abandoned. He stood there, staring at the same wooden boards where she had once stood in chains. I came to make it right, he said quietly. He hammered a new sign into the post, This land is free. No men sold here again. She watched, her eyes glistening, and for the first time, she smiled, not the guarded, weary smile of a survivor, but one full of light. Now you obey something true, she said. He nodded. Maybe for once. They rode home together, the sun sinking gold over the hills, and though neither spoke, both knew something sacred had taken root between them, born not from power, but from forgiveness. Years later, when travelers passed through that valley, they spoke of a ranch where peace seemed to live in the very soil. They said a man and a woman, white and native, worked side by side, their laughter carried on the wind. Some called it love, others redemption. But those who truly listened said it was something more, proof that even in a land built on conquest, compassion could still take root and bloom. And when Jack grew old, sitting by the fire as the stars glowed over the silent plains, he often whispered her name to the wind. Little star, he'd say, you were never mine to own, but you were the light that led me home. And somewhere beyond the pines, her laughter would echo, free, wild, eternal, as if the earth itself remembered the girl who once said, You'll regret this, I won't obey, and turned a man's regret into something holy.